Parshas VaYigash opens up with an encounter, of course, between Yehuda and Yosef. I want to begin with the Medrash. The Medrash quotes a pasuk in Tehillim. The pasuk in Tehillim, we're familiar with it, says, Ki name hamalachim, the kings, noadu, they have a meeting, an encounter, avru yachtav. And Hamaro came to Mo, nivalu, nichpazu. Pasuk opens up with malachim, with kings, noadu. Ze Yehuda v'Yosef, says the Medrash. This pasuk is an allusion to Yosef meeting Yehuda, and here it's two malachim, two kings facing each other. Avru yachtav. Nismale evra zelzeh. Evra means anger. Hema Ro came to Mo. This refers to the brothers who are watching what's going on. Rada chazosam sham elu hashvatim v'amru, and the shiftei ka, who are on the sidelines watching this encounter between Yosef and Yehuda, they declare Melachim midainim elu ve'imelu. There's some sort of a conflict going on between these two kings. Anu, we're on the sidelines. Yoi lemelech midayin melech. It's appropriate for two kings to be embroiled in that conflict. We're on the sidelines. We derive from this medrash a very, very important conclusion. And that is that the encounter that we're looking at and that was being observed by the Shvatim between Yehuda and Yosef is not just about Binyamin, in which Yehuda is pleading to free Binyamin and he'll take his place. There's something deeper going on here, something that has more of an impact on history. What's going on at that moment, the Shvatim realize, is going to determine Jewish history. It goes way beyond the issue at the surface of it, of Binyamin. And imagine, Yosef had engineered what we call the Kiyum HaChalomos, the fulfillment of his dreams. The first had already been fulfilled. The second, which entailed Yaakov coming down and bowing to him, had not come to fruition. Yosef was working very hard to see to it that the second dream would come to fruition. And he knew that the only way he could get Yaakov down to Mitzrayim would be if he took Binyamin, because Yaakov would not be able to separate himself from Binyamin. And everything was orchestrated almost perfectly. What was it about the second dream, as opposed to the first, that Yosef so desired to see its fulfillment, even if it meant putting his brothers into more torture until finally the second dream would come to fruition? There was much more at stake than meets the eye, and that is Malchus b'Yisrael. Who would be the father of Malchus b'Yisrael? And Yosef understood that if the second dream would come to fruition, if Yaakov would bow down to him, this could not happen. Yosef could know, there was no possibility of Yosef becoming the Melech without Yaakov's agreement. This was the domain of Yaakov. And unless the second dream with Yaakov bowing down would come to fruition, Yosef would have no shot at Malchus. Yehuda now steps up in this encounter, ki avru yachtav, with a certain evra, zeh al zeh, almost an anger, an antagonism. There's a head-on competition. and Yehuda is vying for Malchus against Yosef. The Shvatim somehow, almost with Ruach HaKodesh, intuitively sense that they are witnessing something that goes way beyond the present, way beyond the immediate issue on the surface level of who will be able to win over Binyamin, who would be able to free and redeem Binyamin, way, way beyond this. The Shvatim knew that here they had to remain as, so to speak, passive spectators in the background. One of these two, whether it be Yehuda or Yosef, would be victorious. And that would determine Malchus through all the generations for the history of Klal Yisrael. And in this encounter, VaYigash Elav Yehuda, the brothers remain quiet on the sidelines. They are watching in front of them a tremendous battle over who will be the king of Israel. And where would the Mashiach come from? Would he come from Yosef? Would he come from Yehuda? Yosef understood that Yehuda was his main competitor. He knew that Yehuda had certain qualities, had a certain ability to come forward and encounter Yosef and battle with Yosef. That much Yosef understood. We know that Yaakov Avinu, when he bestows the bracha in next week's parsha, it's going to be Yehuda is the Ari. Yehuda is the lion. So that Yehuda represents the courage of a lion, the leadership of a lion. The king in the animal universe, the kingdom of animals. That's representative of Malchus. Yosef realizes what he's up against. An individual like Yehuda, who commands so much respect and admiration. The Shvatim look up to Yehuda, and they understand that this Yehuda has something in his essence, in his personality. Look at what Yehuda is willing to do in confronting the Egyptian viceroy, who he doesn't recognize. What he knows is that he's a tyrant, that he's been antagonizing them. He's been falsely accusing them of all sorts of espionage and theft. But this doesn't deter Yehuda. Yehuda has the courage to face even the viceroy of Mitzrayim, who could do anything to him. If he misbehaves and incurs the wrath of the leader of the entire empire, we'll call it the prime minister of then, Yehuda will have to suffer the consequences. But nevertheless, Yehuda is the lion. And he's out there, excuse me, and the brothers are waiting to see what the outcome is going to be. In Yehuda's presentation, he mentions and reviews the questions that Yosef had drilled them with when they first showed up. And he says, Adoni sha'alas avodecha lemor, hayesh lachem av o ach. Now let's translate these words literally. Yosef is asking the brothers, do you have a father? What does that mean, do you have a father? Everyone has a father, except for Adam Arishon. It seems that Yosef was asking them, is your father alive? But the language is too abridged. Instead of Yesh Lachem Av, Yosef should have asked them, Ha'im avichem chai, od avichem chai. When I was a youngster in the town in White Russia called Chaslavich, my Cheder Rebbe, who was a chassid of Chabad, asked us this question. We were young children, barely 10 years old. And I remember Parshas VaYigash. It was a freezing winter day in Russia. And we really, as children, we weren't so much in the mood to learn, to study. Hanukkah just passed. The winter was upon us. The drudgery, it was just not really the mood. But we read the Chumash. The Rebbe asked us in a rotation, one person after the other, to read the Chumash with the Taich into Yiddish. And when one of the boys got to this pasuk, the Rebbe starts drilling him. What is Yosef asking? Hayesh lachem av? Everybody has a father. Oh, the boys started answering, maybe it means, is your father still alive? And the Rebbe was not happy with that answer. Why is it that Yosef wasn't more explicit and clear? Is your father still alive? But Hayesh lachem av, says the Rebbe, means a lot more. It goes beyond just, is your father alive? Is he alive for you? Do you have the respect, the admiration for your father? And Yosef, of course, had reasons to suspect, based on history, that these young men, these Shvatim, did not have the respect for Yaakov that they should have had for the father. And therefore he drilled them. Yesh lachem av? Do you realize that your father is someone that you have to emulate, someone that you have to come to for guidance? Look up to your father. And the message for the children that the Rebbe emphasized over and over again, are you Bali Gaiva? You think so highly of yourself? You think that your father's the old man? He belongs to another generation. He has nothing to tell me, nothing to teach me, nothing to inspire me. That's your Gaiva. And the words of Yosef jump out, and they pierce through our hearts and our minds. Hayesh lachem av. Do you have a father that you look up to? Do you have a father that can impact on you? And this message is so profound. And I never would have sensed it or been aware of it if not for the Rebbe, because he was so dramatic when he transmitted his interpretation of these words. Hayesh lachem av. What is your father to you? Is he an old man? Is he a provider? Does he just sustain you because he's the head of the family and he's out there making a parnasa? Are you basically not rooted in your father's house and in his legacy, but rather you are like shepherds that move from place to place rootless? How do you look at your father? Are you looking at him as a person condescends to the elder and says, oh, they belong to a different dar, archaic? Do you realize, Yesh lachem av, your father has something to tell you. Your father has something to teach you. He can challenge you. He can teach you something that you didn't know before. And this is something which is a message that should ring in our ears for all generations. The greatness of the Jewish community lies in a positive answer, if we can, in all honesty, to Hayesh lachem av. If we can look up to our father, that links us back to an earlier generation. and from that generation all the way back up the line till Har Sinai, Hayesh Lachem Av. Oh, Ach, how do you treat Binyamin, your younger brother? What's your attitude towards the younger generation? Are we raising a younger generation that will take over our mission? Are we dedicated to transmit a legacy to the younger generation? And I speak with great pride about Jewish tradition and the transmission from one generation to another, dar ladar. We live in the United States of America, and we're not afraid of anti-Semitism. The law protects us, and we feel very secure. But yet, we owe allegiance to the land of Israel. And every Jew feels connected to the land. And that's how we raise our children. And why is that so? Because the answer to Hayesh Lachem Av is absolutely yes. Our Av was Avram Avinu, who walked the land. His halech ba'aretz li'arka u'lerachba. Whom, with pride, stand and walk around the borders of the land of Israel as Avram did, shepherding his flock on the dusty dunes, the sand dunes of the land of Israel, making a kinyan, acquiring ownership over the land, sanctifying it for the benefit of all generations. Yes, we have a father. And yes, we have an ach, we have a younger generation, and we will raise them in the spirit with the commitment of our father. We look to our father for advice, for recommendations and inspirations and guidance. Yes, we have an Av. And if we have an Av in the physical universe, then for sure we have Avinu Shebashamayim, the eternal Father in heaven. And basically what Yosef is asking of his brothers is, are you willing to plan for tomorrow? Are you linked and connected to the past and preparing for the future, for the younger generation, to give them all they need in spiritual guidance, in connection to the Av, to Avram Avinu, to the land? We can be so proud today, my friends, of young people in the state of Israel who are willing to put their lives on the line, and how many have unfortunately have perished in the various wars, defending every last inch of the land of Israel because the land was sanctified. And our enemies, they don't understand us. A commitment to something, the land that was given to your great-great-grandfather Avram Avinu 3,500 years ago, ridiculous. Get with the times. Drop the idea. There's a different worldview today. Become part of us. But no, we have an Av. We are dedicated to Avram Avinu, to the land that was chosen by the Almighty and given to Avram Avinu and to his descendants for all generations. And it's so interesting that Yosef added another word in describing the Av Zaken. Here's the paradox. On the one hand, Zaken means an older individual. Who wants to deal with the older people? They belong to years bygone, generations of the past. But the word Zaken is the same word that appears at the beginning of Parshas VaYigash that describes the very essence of the relationship between Yaakov and Yosef. Ki ben zkunim hulo. Rashi says, what does ben zkunim mean? Ein Zikna L'Chachma, the wisdom of Torah. And Yosef was personally chosen by Father Jacob, singled out for the Mesores, for the transmission of Torah, the Zikna, the wisdom of a Zaken. We compare a Talmid Chacham to wine for two reasons, because Yayin represents Sod, the secrets, but moreover, because Yayin gets better with time. And so too, in the Torah world, the more work you put in, the longer the decades of Yom V'Layl, dedication to Torah study, you become a Zaken. You become someone who's Koneh Torah and Chachma. And the Torah commands us, V'adarta pnei Zaken. Hidur Zaken. Respect the Zaken. It doesn't just mean standing up for the Zaken. It's much more profound, much more far-reaching. It's looking up to the Zaken. I know a member of my family who applied for a job as a rabbi in a community. And he happened to have been at that time over 50. They said, no dice. We will not hire a rabbi past the age of 50. There's a tendency to disrespect the elders instead of respecting them, instead of standing in awe of that generation that has wisdom, was Koneh Torah and Chachma. No, we want the young people. And the Torah says, Yosef says, Hayesh lachem av zaken. Do you respect his elderly wisdom, his wisdom of Chachma? We have so much to learn from our father. And in a sense, Yosef represents, in terms of the history and his relationship to the Shvatim from the time that they settled in Mitzrayim, a different kind of Mesorah. The Mesorah that we're familiar with, the transmission is the transmission of Torah. And I'm not sure that Yosef can exactly fit that mold to say that he was the transmitter of Torah to the rest of the Shvatim. But there's another Mesorah, and that is the Mesorah Balabatim, of those members of the community who are totally dedicated to the community. At self-sacrifice, they put everything for the community first. And they are the sustainers of the entire tzibur. That's Yosef. Yosef is going to transmit a different kind of a Mesorah. He will be the paradigm for all generations of someone who can sustain his community of Klal Yisrael. He could support them. They live because he sustains them. And we have a beautiful integration of two forms and modes of Mesorah. We have the Mesorah of Torah and the Mesorah of the Balabatim, of the love and the chesed and the dedication to a community. And we're going to see later on in Parshas VaYigash, Mirz Hashem, the amazing blend of a Yosef with the Issachar, with the Zvulun, and every Shevet, every member of Shiftei Ka, the sons of Yaakov, who contribute to creating that beautiful enterprise, that entity of Knesset Yisrael, Knesset Miloshen Kinus. It's an integration in which every member of the community of Beis Yaakov will play his role and make his contribution. And therefore, it's so important that here at the beginning of VaYigash, the Torah puts things into a perspective, and the message is Yesh lachem av, v'yesh lachem ach chotem. Our existence through the generations as a spiritual community, something that baffles the minds of all the other communities and the nations on the face of the earth. All of those nations are totally focused on continuing the nation as a physical nation, as being alive, as being healthy, economically solid. But that's not the secret of our nation and how it is that we still exist after all these millennia. The answer is because we are dedicated not only to the existence of the nation as a physical people, but moreover, as a religious, spiritual nation. We have an Av, and we are dedicated to our Av. And in Yehuda's bold encounter with Yosef, he says that it's impossible for us to return back to our father without Binyamin. And why is that so? The pasuk says, because nafsho kshura b'nafsho. And that is the last pasuk here in Perek Lam. Now, Yehuda presents a picture in which Yaakov's life is on the line, so to speak. He may perish if something happens to Binyamin. But it's interesting the language that Yehuda uses to describe the relationship between Yaakov and Binyamin. Nafsho kshura b'nafsho. Two nefashos, two souls that have a profound connection. We're not talking about a normal, regular, rank and file relationship, not even a profound relationship between a father and son. We're talking about an existential relationship of two souls that are united into one. And there's no doubt that what Yehuda has in mind is that now Binyamin is the replacement for Yosef. Yosef, before he was taken away, was the nafsho kshura b'nafsho of Father Yaakov. The relationship between Yaakov and Yosef is something that is so profound. It's a different quality. It's a oneness which cannot be described in words. And so when Yosef looks in the mirror, all he sees is Father Yaakov, because he and Yaakov are one. And when Yosef is ripped away from Yaakov, it's nafsho kshura b'nafsho. Yaakov goes through a very long period in which he has no joy in life. The Shechina departs from him because the Gemara tells us that Ein HaShechina Shora Elamitoch Simcha, and Yaakov's Simcha is gone, is lost. So Yehuda argues that all that Father Jacob has left in this world is Binyamin Nafsho Kshura B'Nafsho. What happens to Yosef at this point? This is a dramatic turning point. And the pasuk tells us, "V'lo yochal Yosef lehisapek," and Yosef breaks down right here at the beginning, the first pasuk in Perek Memches. Why is this a turning point? And what is the significance of this pasuk? In Yosef's plan, he would not buckle under. He would not capitulate. He would insist and pursue his program till the very end, until Yaakov would come down from Mitzrayim, from Eretz Canaan to Mitzrayim, and bow to him. And then Yosef would have clinched Malchus b'Yisrael. But the plan did not materialize. And the second dream, with Yaakov bowing down to Yosef, never came to fruition. And why is that? Yaakov, at this point, is not going anywhere. And even Yosef fails to organize, to orchestrate it that Yaakov will come down to Mitzrayim. Perhaps we could suggest that Yosef sensed that with Yehuda's presentation, Yehuda was one-upping, and he was beginning to sense and intuit that this man is none other than Yosef himself. If Yosef wouldn't have arrested that moment, then Yosef suspected that Yehuda would have been the one to reveal that this is Yosef. And that's something that Yosef would not allow to happen. So Yosef jumps the gun. He takes the initiative. Before Yehuda exposes me, I will present myself. I will reveal myself. Vayomer Yosef Elechav Ani Yosef. I am Yosef. Those three words, Ani Yosef, when he reveals his identity, will change Jewish history. Pasuk Gimel right here. Yosef realizes that he will not be able to bring the second dream to fruition. He will have to forfeit his claim of Malchus B'Yisrael. And in this battle, in this confrontation, Yehuda is chosen, is elected to be the Melech B'Yisrael. Malchus is going to come from Yehuda, and Mashiach from Yehuda, Mashiach ben David. I'd like to try to understand, perhaps it's beyond our human comprehension, why is it that in the unfolding story of this drama, HaKadosh Baruch Hu in his divine wisdom and his providence sees to it that it's Yehuda who will be chosen for Malchus B'Yisrael rather than Yosef. After all, one would have suspected that Yosef, who integrates so many different attributes into his personality, as we spoke about last week, he would be the ripe and the correct candidate for Melech B'Yisrael. In order to understand the difference between Yehuda and his candidacy, so to speak, his quality for Malchus, and that of Yosef, I would like to present to you two other approaches, and then what I think is the right answer, a third approach. The first approach sees in this battle, in this competition between Yosef and Yehuda, a competition between two different modes of service to Hashem, of avodas Hashem. And now the dispute is which of those two methods, which of those two approaches is primary and is most significant. We mentioned before that Yosef, from his infancy, is chosen, designated by Yaakov as the Ben Skudim to transmit, as Rashi says at the beginning of Vayeshev, the Torah that Yaakov had learned in Shem V'Yever for so many years to Yosef. Yosef, therefore, represents Torah. And in order to bring support to this position, I would like to quote a Gemara in Masechta Yoma, Adaf Lamed Hey and Beis. The Gemara says, Yosef hayamachayev es harishoy. What does that mean? The Rasha comes in front of the high court, and when they ask him, Mipnei malo asakta b'Torah, why did you waste your life away? You didn't study the Torah. He says, No hayisi, I was a very good-looking fellow. V'torid b'yitzri hayisi, I was overwhelmed by my Yetzer Hara. Omrim lo klum noah hayitza b'Yosef. Are you better looking than Yosef was? And Yosef was dedicated to Torah. Moreover, The Medrash tells us in Parshas VaYigash on the pasuk Vayavo Abaisa Lasos Malachto. Yosef came home to do his malacha. Ma malacha haya ose, says the Yalkut Shimoni. Shone v'kora masha aviv limdo. His malacha was dedication to the Torah that he studied with his father, and he knew it by heart, and he reviewed it, and he learned it. And we're going to see soon that he even sent a message to Yaakov, reminding Yaakov of the last sugya in Torah that they studied together, the sugya of Egel Aruf. That's Yosef, and he represents Torah. What could be a greater avodas Hashem than Torah? Certainly the Mashiach will come when we rededicate our energies, our devotion, our dedication to Torah. Yehuda, on the other hand, represents tshuva. The Gemara tells us that Yehuda did an amazing thing when he publicly confessed his crime, his violation with Tamar. And the Medrash in Parshas VaYigash, when Yaakov bestows the bracha Yehuda Ata Yoducha Achecha, the Medrash says Ata Hodesa b'Maisa Tamar Yoducha Achecha Lios Melech Aleha. You aren't embarrassed. Vayaker Yehuda Vayomer Tzadka Mimeni, and you took upon yourself the humiliation in order to rectify your sin and publicly recite a confession. And therefore, Yehuda, as opposed to Yosef, represents the Baal Tshuva par excellence. Chazal tell us, Ein Yisrael Nig'olim El B'Tshuva. The redemption will come about through tshuva. And the Rambam writes, Sof Yisrael Lachzor B'Tshuva. And therefore Yehuda claims Malchus, and David HaMelech is also the great paradigm of tshuva, doing tshuva for his sin. And this is going to be the purpose and the responsibility of the Melech HaMashiach, bring about the Ge'ul. Others say that the issue between Yehuda and Yosef was the same issue that the Rambam vacillates about in his famous work, which he penned, called Shmona Prakim. And he speaks about two different personality types. One is a personality that from his birth, he's a tzaddik. He loves to do good and to study. And the other personality type is someone who faces difficult challenges, and in the religious spiritual realm, he falls and he has to climb up again. Who is greater? The tzaddik, who by nature is a tzaddik, or the Baal Tshuva, who by nature has evil inclinations, he has passions and desires, a strong Yetzer Hara that he has to overcome. And the Rambam goes back and forth, Ayin Shom. We don't find that Yosef ever fell prey to his lust, to the Yetzer Hara. He's a tzaddik from birth. Yehuda, on the contrary, faces challenge after challenge, falling many, many times, only to get up in this encounter with Yosef. But I personally would suggest a different answer to the question as to the two personalities of Yehuda and Yosef and what they represent in order to arrive at the conclusion and answer the question why HaKadosh Baruch Hu chose Yehuda for Malchus. We go back one generation to the generation of Rachel and Leah. Let's think about Leah as a personality. The first word that comes to my mind is determination. She realizes that she is designated not for Yaakov, but on the contrary for Esau. But she never gives up. The word Leah, etymology, is leus. Leus means exhaustion. It means a tremendous amount of work that requires energizing oneself with unlimited determination. And that's Leah. She never gives up. In fact, the Torah describes the birth later on of one of the Shvatim, that she, Leah, takes the initiative to buy, so to speak, the rights to have Yaakov that evening. Again, she's very aggressive. Let's go back to the parsha of Lavan. Lavan approaches Leah with his deceitful program, in which Lavan is going to give Leah over to Yaakov against Yaakov's will. And Leah is absolutely determined. She is in cahoots, in the sense, with Father Lavan in order to get that right to be part of Knesset Yisrael. Never giving up. That is her midah. In Sfiros, we call this, the Bali Kabbalah call this midas hagvura. Gvura means more than physical strength. Gvura means a dedication that doesn't let up. It's restless. It is all the way, never giving up. There's a clear-cut goal, and the Gibar will reach that goal at all costs. Self-sacrifice. Leus, meaning exhaustion. Nothing will stop Leah. And then we get to Rachel, a totally different personality. Rachel is also in cahoots with Lavan, in a certain sense, and she hands over the simanim that Yaakov had given her to sister Leah, knowing full well that she is now removing herself and allowing Leah to reach that happiness and that joy of being part of Knesset Yisrael, of being married to Yaakov. Her midah is the midah of love and dedication, of chesed, of rachamim, of compassion. The willingness to give up on one's own claim sacrificially for the sake of someone else, for the benefit of another individual. And now we go down one generation. Yehuda is the son of Leah, Yosef of Rachel. What does Yehuda inherit from his mother Leah? Yehuda, like Leah, is absolutely determined, restless. He will take every initiative. He will leave no stone unturned. As courageous as a lion, he's called Gur Aryeh Yehuda. Yehuda is the personification of someone who will pursue his enemies. He radiates energy, authority, power. He's a leader by nature, and his brothers look up to him in awe. His personality is like a lion. He's a warrior. He's fearless. And that's what we see here at the beginning of Parshas VaYigash. He's not afraid to fight the battle for his brother Binyamin, even facing against the viceroy, that tyrant of Egypt. Yosef, on the other hand, represents chesed. How is it that Yosef is able to forgive his brothers for what they did to him and compassionately share love, sustain them? He steps aside, and that's what happens right here in this parsha. V'lo yochol lisapek vayomer Yosef ani Yosef. Yosef represents the midah of sacrifice. At the great moment in his life, the apex when he is about to clinch Malchus b'Yisrael, when it's within his reach, if he continues to persist with his program to bring Yaakov down to Mitzrayim, and inches before he succeeds, he surrenders his position and he retreats in an act of self-sacrifice. And in a sense, giving Yehuda Malchus b'Yisrael. Why does HaKadosh Baruch Hu choose Yehuda? Why was it such that divine providence saw to it that it was Yehuda who would win in this encounter with Yosef? It's Yosef who buckles in and capitulates. The answer is that the main personality and character trait of a Melech B'Yisrael is not chesed, but rather leadership. It's determination. It's willing to go against your enemies relentlessly. And that is the midah of Gvura, which was personified by Mother Leah and by Yehuda, who becomes the father of Malchus B'Yisrael. I once published an essay in a journal called Tradition of the Rabbinical Council of America. This was in the spring of 1978. And I spoke about catharsis. And catharsis is a purifying experience in which a person reaches close to success. And then he realizes that he may have to give up. He may have to give up his position and retreat and surrender. I gave an example there of a very famous medrash that speaks about Suga Kishoshanim, and it describes in dramatic detail a groom and a bride. They're about to consummate their marriage in the privacy of a room. It's just he and her. How long of a time period has he waited for this moment? And the Medrash describes that she sees tipas dam kechardo, and immediately he withdraws. Can you imagine the power, the gevura, to overcome in the privacy of your bedroom because she became a need? That is an experience which purifies, which elevates a person. It's a level of sacrifice, of determination, that only the leaders of Klal Yisrael can personify and teach this, and that's Yehuda. The ability of Yehuda to go so far as to encounter in a face-to-face confrontation Yosef, the viceroy of Mitzrayim. That is the leadership of Gvura, and that is the Melech B'Yisrael. On a personal level, in terms of individuals, I would say that Yosef's midah is greater than that of Yehuda. But in terms of nationhood, in terms of Malchus B'Yisrael, we need Yosef in every single individual, member of Klal Yisrael, the willingness to do chesed, compassion, love, and self-sacrifice for the benefit of the community. No doubt Yosef is the example par excellence that we all have to emulate. But when it comes to Malchus, it's the midah of Gvura that HaKadosh Baruch Hu saw as the most important and determining factor in choosing the Melech. Yosef reveals himself and embraces his brother Binyamin. Vayipol al tzavore Binyamin achiv. Pasuk Yudal. Rashi already notices that tzavore is a very strange word here. The word neck is tzavar in plural, tzavore. What are these two necks? Rashi says, Al shnei mikdashos shasidim lios bechelko shebinyamin v'sofo lichore. The weeping here on one level could be understood simply in human psychological terms. It's an unbelievably powerful emotional meeting here between two brothers. But Rashi suggests that the crying of these brothers goes way beyond the moment itself, deep into the future of Klal Yisrael and destruction of the two Batei Mikdashos that are in the area of Binyamin. Where does Paro fit into this whole picture? What is his response? Pasuk Tezayin, Hakol Nishma Beis Paro Lemar, Bo Achei Yosef. The brothers of Joseph have come. Vayitav B'Einei Paro. Paro's excited. Let's understand for a moment the perspective of Paro. He knows of Yosef. Yosef is brilliant. Yosef is going to engineer the entire culture, the entire economy, and the politics of the great nation, the empire of Egypt. Where did he come from? He must have a superior family that genetically produces someone like Yosef so brilliant. His brothers must also have that same genetic code. They also are brilliant. They can make a tremendous contribution to Egyptian society. But there's another element here in the equation. Who is Yosef? From a perspective of Egyptian society, we all know Yosef is a slave. Yosef was accused of a vicious crime. He was thrown as a prisoner into jail, and from there, he was appointed to be the second in command of Viceroy of Egypt. Could you imagine what the elitist society sensed? Almost embarrassment that this lowly slave, this Eved Ivri, who is a criminal, is now running our entire country. The elitists realize that this Yosef is not coming from nowhere. He comes from a family. He comes from a family of brothers who are very, very impressive. He perhaps is a scion of a great lineage of nobility. And in fact, Avram Avinu was called Nasi Elokim. He was the prince, the godly prince in the nations. This is the source, the original genealogy of Yosef. But perhaps Paro, as we said before, was interested in the creative genius of these brothers. And the hope of Paro was that they would be well integrated into Egyptian society. His plan was to settle the brothers in different areas of Egypt, and there they would have an impact and elevate the society with their culture, with their wisdom, their insights. But Yosef had a different plan. Yosef disappointed Paro by telling Paro that he wants the brothers and the entire Beis Yaakov to live together in an area outside the bounds of the great city, the capital city of Egypt. And what was Yosef's philosophy? What was his agenda, if you will? Yosef was afraid lest the brothers become integrated into Egyptian society. They have to maintain their distance. And therefore they have to live be Eretz Goshen. And now, at this point, Paro tells Yosef, take these agalot, take these wagons. Let's read the pasuk inside. Pasuk Yutes v'atot tzivisa. I am now commanding you, a mandate, zosasu, chulachem eretz Mitzrayim agalos, unasasem es avichem uvos. Why does Paro have to command Yosef to take the wagons? I believe that the wagons were an invention of Egyptian culture, the most advanced technology of that time. And they weren't sold on the free market. No one could take the secret of the wagons of Mitzrayim, the chariots of Mitzrayim, and sell them to a foreign nation. They would never leave the bounds of Egypt unless Paro himself would sign the document and allow that to happen. And therefore, Paro says to Yosef, I command you, you have my mandate to take the agalot, to take these wagons and bring them to your father. I am now sharing with you the chariot about which in Shiras Hayam, Sus v'rochbo Roma vayam. And this military secret I'm giving over to you, Yosef, in order to allow you to bring your father back. And then he says, Unesasem es avichem, carry your father. What is the significance of carrying your father? Wouldn't it be enough to put Yosef into a wagon and let the oxen bring Yaakov, down to Mitzrayim? No, unesasem, I want you to carry him. I want the human element here. It reminds me of the Aron Abris, which was carried by the Bnei Levi on their shoulders out of respect. And what is the response of Yaakov, when Yosef's brothers come to tell him that Od Yosef Chai, v'chiu Moshel, Pasuk Chavav, v'chiu Moshel b'chol eretz Mitzrayim, v'yofeg libo, hilo hemin lahem. His heart fainted because he couldn't believe that. Why didn't he believe that? And the answer to this question is the same identical answer to the question, Hayesh lachem av, od avichem chai. We're not talking about physical living. We're not talking about 90 years, 100 years. We're talking about a different kind of chai. Yehem chayenu. Is it possible, Yaakov asked himself, that Yosef, over all these years, separated from his father's house, rising to this great position, running the entire culture, the civilization of Mitzrayim, is it possible that Yosef is still chai? He's still connected to his roots? But Vayidabru Elov es kol divrei Yosef. And what convinced Yaakov that Yosef was chai? They told him the words of Yosef, that Yosef was willing to forget, was willing to embrace them with love and forgive them for the terrible misdeed of Mechiras Yosef. Od Yosef Chai. Only someone who's dedicated to the covenantal community, to Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, only such an individual could rise to the greatness of a Yosef, who could speak words of consolation and bring his brothers close to him. He is definitely alive. And the clincher, as the Pasuk describes it, is that Yaakov sees the agalot, asher sholach Yosef, vayar es hagalot. Why does this convince Yaakov that Yosef is still alive? Rashi quotes the famous Gemara in Sota that the agalot were a secret key, a secret coded message that Yosef was sending to Father Jacob. The last Gemara, the last sugi that we learned together before I was sold at the age of 17 was the sugi of Egla Rufa. And there's a Gzeres Shava here, so to speak, between the word Egla in Egla Rufa, which refers to a calf, and Agala, which refers to a wagon. But why? Why is it in the divine scheme of things that the last sugya that father teaches son before they are broken apart is Egla Rufa, and the Simon that Yosef sends to his father that I am still alive is this Egla that represents the Egla Rufa? And here we have to just ask the question, the most bizarre pasuk in Chumash, perhaps, in all of the Torah, is in the parsha of Eglah Rufa. The elders come down before the ritual of the Arifas Eglah, and they declare Yodenu lo shafchu es adam hazeh einenu lo ro. They wipe their hands free of any guilt. What guilt? A man was slain. He apparently was trying to attack some sort of caravan and steal their goods, and they killed him. Why would the elders be held responsible? And it's frightening to think of what the Torah demands of a leader in Israel. It's not enough that the leaders care about their community and they determine and rule and judge. All that is fine and dandy, but they have to know what's going on. They have to know that there was a man who came to this community and he needed a place to sleep. He needed food and lodging. And the Gemara tells us that perhaps this terrible catastrophe occurred because this man was left alone. He left the city and there was no one there to protect him. No one had supplied him with the needs that he had. And then he got into an attack out of desperation that led to his death. This is the concept of achrayus, of responsibility that rests on the shoulders of the leaders of the Jewish community. And Yosef is conveying a very profound message to Father Yaakov. He's saying, I know that this was the sugya that we learned, and I allowed the lesson, the underlying meaning of this Eglah Rufa Parsha to penetrate into my soul. I have dedicated myself to a leadership, to being compassionate and concerned and sensitive, to empathize with every single member of the society. And we know what Yosef did, and we discussed it last week. Yosef would not allow anyone to starve, even when countries and nations came from outside of Egypt. He sold them at the same price, whatever their needs were. This is Yosef, a leadership with responsibility. This is the Yosef of the Eglah Rufa. And the pasuk ends, and with this will end for tonight. Vatachi ruach Yaakov Avihu. The spirit of their father Jacob was revived. Yosef sent him the Eglah Rufa message. He told him that he follows the teachings of his father. He has never alienated himself, even for one moment, from the Torah of his father. Od avichai yesh li av. And if we could take some of these examples of the giants of our forefathers to heart, if we can emulate a Yosef, if we can emulate a Yehuda, Yosef, as he was dedicated to the teachings of his father, he who cares compassionately, he who represents and embodies chesed and compassion. A Yehuda who, coming from Leah, is determined with great courage never to give up, relentless work and fighting for the causes of Israel. If we can emulate and love our parents and respect them, and then to raise our children with that great legacy, then Emir Hashem, the Od Avichai, will be the Avinu Shebashamayim, who will have great compassion and will bestow upon us the ultimate redemption, the Mashiach ben David, who will come and end all atzaros. B'mheira v'yameinu. Amen. Thank you so much. Everyone should have a wonderful, wonderful Shabbos, Parshas VaYigash. We should always get together for these occasions to study Torah together.
Amen, amen.
Amen. Thank you so much.
Amen. Thank you. Thank you very
Shkoach,
much.
Rav.
Shkoach, Rav.
Shkoach, shkoach.